Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm speaking with Lisa Alexander. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. I'm very excited to be speaking with you once again.
Yeah, really excited to have you back on. Let's start where we always start. Let's do some introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have an AM now, Dan, since last time, I think, Lisa Alexander AM, which is an Order of Australia medal. And we are quite proud of that because one of the things that we're meant to do is actually to promote it so that we are good leaders promoting us getting those honours, but also thinking about honouring others as well. So, and one of my great mentors, Jill McIntosh, in coaching, who was a previous Australian Diamonds coach and who I worked with because I was a domestic coach at that time, she just recently got an AM as well. So I was really chuffed about that because she was a great mentor to me. She was the only person who sent me a text message after we got beaten by New Zealand by 1 goal in 2019 in Liverpool. She was the first one that was texting me to say, "Listen, that was a brilliant game, and as you know, it's always the luck of the draw in those matches and the toss of a coin." So, yeah, she's a great person, but yes, I'm very proud of that AM as my family is. And yeah, I'm a former Australian Diamonds coach, and that I did that for 10 years and love doing it so much. I still talk about it a lot and reflect on it a lot. And we're coming up to a very important reunion this year, which is our 10 years since we won the gold medal in Glasgow in 2014, had that breakthrough win because we hadn't won a Com Games since 2002. So we broke the drought and it was a fabulous time. I'm thinking about it now. And I actually spoke to my captain today, Laura Geitz at the time. She's got 4 kids now and she's super busy, but yeah, she's just a great person to speak to when you need a bit of advice about a few things. I often ring her and she seeks my advice too. So it's great. I've been coaching now in high performance levels for 30 years. I've been a teacher in the past. I am now a consultant and I coach coaches a lot now. So I'm really loving doing that, working in the coach development space. But I've always worked in that space. I've been in coach education basically at the start of my career because everyone was expected to do it back in those days. So, yeah, and being a teacher as well, of course, that my skills lent to that quite nicely. So, yeah, that's me. And I'm a mum of 3 children. I've got 2 daughters and a son, and I've got a granddaughter now, Brody, who's 5 years old going on 20. And I've got a gorgeous husband too.
Can't forget him. Incredible biography. And as you said, a decade since that win with the Diamonds. And when you reflect back, you mentioned there, I mean, you threw in a bit of psychology there as you were speaking. You said, I'm picturing that now. I'm thinking about that now. What you won the gold medal there. What pictures sort of rise up in your head? What comes through when you think about that, the game, the tournament?
Oh, wow, it was a great tournament because we had our own little house in Glasgow. We called it the Netball House. And so we really had just all of us together. And I remember my assistant coach, Michelle Decker, and I swapped rooms with Laura Geitz and our vice captain, Bianca Chatfield. We gave them the bigger room and we took the smaller room because we felt that leaders eat last. Really, I believe that. And we do everything to make sure our players are as comfortable and ready to perform as possible. So that was all part of that. So I've just always been into psychology and since day one of coaching. So that meant that they understood we gave them a little, we made a personal sacrifice for those two to have more room. And that's what we sought to do, was to make sure the players were as comfortable and ready to perform as possible in a very, very uncomfortable, changing, um, tournament space that you never know what you're gonna get. And, we only managed to beat England by 1 goal. It was tight, tough. everyone thought then that England might get us at the next Com Games, and in fact they did. And the venue itself was quite unique because it was only small, and we're used to having really big crowds, so I was quite upset at the start when I realised we're only gonna be in a 3,000 seat stadium. Normally in Australia, we might have up to 12,000 people watching us. So, I think at that time, Com Games didn't sort of, didn't hold netball in the space that it probably should have. And then they moved us to where the gymnastics had been held. So it was a bit bigger stadium then. We went into a stadium of 7,000, which was great because we could get all our family in there to watch. And we had many little things that going on. Our social committee used to organise all these little activities to keep us all focused on the job at hand. Little games like we had to guess. They put these little stones out. They'd pick 12 stones, and we had to pick who each one represented out of the team. And it wasn't just about how they visually looked. It could have been something else that was quite offline or unique about that particular rock. And that was a fun activity that I don't they're the fun things to remember. And, they're all adding to that real connection together as a group and a team that we had very solidly in that house.
You said some really interesting things there, and sort of this overarching idea of from day one in your coaching career, you were into psychology. I mean, this is the Sports Fight Show, so let's just briefly focus on that. You said, for you as a leader, leaders eat last. So you wanted to put your players first. At the end of what you were saying there, you talked about connection being very important. The rock game, which sounds like an interesting sort of way for players to have conversations, get to know each other, and consider each other in slightly different
Mm.
ways. A sort of a sense of social cohesion there. As you said, you only beat England by 1 point in the end, so clearly an element of performance under pressure. When you think of performance under pressure, or any kind of psychology when it comes to tournaments, you've mentioned some really important things there. But what else springs to mind for you? What's important from the psychological perspective?
It's definitely working individually with each player to understand their own performance psychology and what they need from me as their head coach. But it's a very specific way of going about it. So they need certain things from me as a head coach of the whole program, where we really work together. I'm sort of like a resource for them, where I lead their program, but we do it together. So it's a real partnership. And we also include their domestic coach as well in part of that conversation. So they feel like they're really being coached, they're being improved as individuals. So me getting to know them as people, but also their psychology around performance was really important, down to really specific things like every match, our players would always put in their pre-game goals for the match, and that would always have physical and mental elements to it, as well as recovery elements, as well as some unit and tactical and teamwork elements. So I think from that, I always used to do that with my teams I coached back in my early state teams that I coached back in the day for Victoria. So I just made that system a little bit more technologically easier. The players could just do it on their athlete management systems that we had with their phones and computers. And then I could also write a feedback report based on all of those goals back to them. They wouldn't have to reset them necessarily for each game, and often some of them would just copy and paste, but I could always tell when they were doing that. But it certainly helped me to understand and know that they were preparing in that way. So they knew that I expected them to prepare physically and mentally for a match. And that was made clear to all the athletes right from the start. So I actually had sports psychology and their own work in that space as a part of their individual athlete performance plans. So they knew that I felt that it was important, And I spoke about it in all the meetings that we would have. So they would have to have, if they were a shooter, a shooting routine that they would go through, whether it was a breath control thing or something they say to themselves. And that was also linked into the coaching process of their specialist coach as well. So I was lucky enough to have Margie Caldo, who was a triple world champion shooter for Australia and also a great coach. She coached England as well. Actually, she got the whole UK Super League started in England for netball. Um, but she was brilliant because she really had that process of coaching that took into place the person, where they were at, their technical capabilities and needs, but also their psychological capability and needs. And she was tremendously good at getting the best out of all of our shooters individually, as well as working together as a unit and a combination with our attack end. So, so many elements to it, Dan. It's just incredibly detailed and complex at times, but also I never remove the real person from these conversations as well, because at the end of the day, you're a human being and we can highlight a certain aspect of your performance, but if your heart's not in it or something's distracting you outside or, you know, if everything isn't working spiritually between the two of us, I know the athletes can really smell, they can taste almost if you're into it or not. And so that's where the authenticity of what you're saying and how you're working with that person is so important.
I love that idea of a kind of a rich sensorial experience that players have.
Mm.
They're great detectives of participation, involvement, connection, interest, and so on and so forth. I think that's a really important and pertinent thing to say. You allude to the complexity of coaching there, and when you reflect back on being the Diamonds coach, when you reflect on your experiences subsequently, what for you were and are the most challenging aspects of coaching? And you might consider the psychosocial aspects, but please do consider those with relation to the tech tac physical pieces. What is really challenging for you in coaching? What are the tough moments, or what did you find to be the tough moments when it came to coaching your people?
Yeah, it's definitely coaching people. And at the end of the day, I can think of an example of an athlete that just would not do the physical work that was needed to get them doing what I required of them in their position. I would always be up against barriers, and this involved all the coaches around this player too in their domestic competition. And at the end of the day, well, they kept the barriers up between us and what that athlete was expected to do on the court. And that athlete had specific strengths and really wonderful strengths. We're not saying that they didn't, but they had this area that we needed them for our game plan to improve. And so that was a really difficult process to work through. And in the end, that player was dropped out of our, and that's when I get quite heartbroken about things because I feel like it's a failure from me that we weren't able to get that player to understand, no, in order for you to make the leap to the next stage and evolution of your game, you need to do this. And because they'd relied on this particular strength and power and, vertical power as well. And then they couldn't do the grinding grunt work that goes with winning an 80-minute match that goes into extra overtime. And they also get tired. That's the whole thing. Players, when they're physically not able at the end of the matches, that's when their, cognitive decision making ability goes. And so that the harder you work on that grunt work that you have to do, out in the training court and pre-season, if you don't do that work, it comes back to bite you on the backside in the finals. And this player, we just didn't get through it, and she ended up not being in the team the following year. We chose another player, but but that's the fine lines that you're up against. And, you know, she's a great person. I really loved having her in the team. She was our vice captain, and she contributed so much, but that particular area was a blind spot for her, and I just could not unlock it.
You see, I think this is a really fascinating area, and I've sat in rooms with coaches coaching teams, in my consultancy positions, having these conversations with coaches. And I always remember Eddie Jones used to say, when I was lead type for England Rugby, how do we change behaviour? How do we change behaviour? Was kind of his instigator of this challenge.
Mm.
And you mentioned the cognitive side. You mentioned how if we can't get this player to change physically, then it's going to impact their cognitive side, and vice versa. Do you think that some people are simply unable to do certain things, and that can be players with a great deal of skill in their feet, or a great deal of skill in their hands, or a natural aptitude, if you want to, at the sport that we're coaching, and yet there are some things that those players are just simply unable to do, and coaches can't help them with? Or do you think that sometimes as coaches we just can't find the right way to unlock what we need them to do?
I think the latter. I think that because I'm a teacher, I believe everyone can learn at
Okay.
the end of the day. So that's me. And I know other coaches will give up earlier
Yeah.
because they're lucky they've got a talent pipeline that comes through. And at the end of the day, at the international level, that's what does it. And so if somebody asks me, well, why didn't that player make it? I'll say it's because of their lack of attention to things like performance psychology or mental toughness, for want of a better word, or whatever it is that was that edge that they needed to, and I liken it to what the Tour de France cyclists are doing at the moment. I've just watched the Netflix documentary, which I found absolutely fascinating, and I recommend all coaches to watch it, is the suffering that athletes have to do to get through, and that's what it is. And I think today's athletes think for some reason, particularly in team sports like netball and so forth, that you have to have fun and enjoy everything and everything has to be positive. Well, guess what? You know, life's not like that. And I just think sometimes we have done our kids a bit of a disservice by not providing enough experiences for them when someone says no, or you need to do that again, or whatever it is. Even watching David McAllister, who was the artistic director of the Australian Ballet, and I was lucky enough to go and watch him do his work. You know, it reminded me in ballet and those and gymnastics even that real desire to get perfection. Yes, you do have to do things again. Yes, you do have to repeat stuff. Sometimes it's boring. But that is what's going to get you that perfect layup or that perfect shot when we need it under pressure when, you know, New Zealand have been thumping us for the whole game and the umpire's not picking it up. You have to be able to put that shot through for the team.
I don't know if I'm going to formulate a question, but I just want to say a few things back at you, because I think this is a fascinating area, and certainly this is a fascinating area for me as a sports psych and for us in sports psychology, because we have to be really, really careful and nuanced in our messaging and in our work, because we are invested in helping organizations, teams, coaches develop environments that are safe and healthy. Safe for sure, absolutely, and I think we
Mm.
can all agree that any kind of bullying or any kind of pernicious ism, such as racism, sexism, and so on and so forth, have no place in sport whatsoever. And we also need to appreciate that young people in talent development pathways
Mm.
deserve the best possible coaching, the best possible messaging from coaches and sports psychologists around, the importance of, you might call, the rocky road of development, and the appropriateness of speed bumps and roadblocks and challenge, and even well, just producing the right volume of challenge in activities and in goal setting and along that pathway, I think is absolutely imperative. And it
Mm,
also makes me think of the linguistic difference between enjoyment and fun. Fun, okay, there's no question that it should be a part of that process, but enjoyment feels a little bit different in as much as I can enjoy the struggle. The struggle might not be fun, but I need to learn to enjoy the struggle. As I said, Lisa,
exactly.
no,
Yeah.
no question as such, just a thought back to you, a few thoughts back to you.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's just, I'm not saying, because, I can look back on the Indian files we used to do before our 3-hour training sessions when I played for Victoria with my mates that are all coaching now, and we all laugh about it now. We didn't enjoy it at the time, I can tell you, but we know now that that was an activity that our coach gave us to make us work harder than everybody else. We didn't love it at the time, but we knew it was contributing towards an overall goal. And our coach made that very clear to us. And she knew that if we did that work, we would be the fittest team at a national championships in Darwin, where it was going to be hot and we had finals for the first time. So if we were going to be the fittest team, then we needed to do the work together as a team. No one doing those things at home. You did it together as a team. So you could see if anyone was, slacking off or whatever. So we look back on that time now with smiles and delight that we got through it, that we actually came through and won the national title for the first time for 10 years, Victoria. And, I can smile about the one of the players in that team who we just lost recently. She died in a motorcycle accident in Spain. And so for me to tell that story, those stories matter in sport. They're part of our DNA, our social history, and they're the stories that we do need to convey to young people that, yeah, sometimes we do go through some hard times together, but we get out of it at the end of the day. And look at all the friendships that we've made along the way, those mates that we can just, turn up to a 10-year reunion and you sort of can smile about those days. You can laugh about them as well because you know that you probably wouldn't get away with that as coaches these days, especially a 3-hour training session. And, but they're the sort of things that really created that great character that Australian teams have. And I know many other countries look at us and go, how do these Aussies get that character? Well, a lot of it is born out of the big spaces, a lot of sun. It's hot when you're training in preseason, and you are pushing your body beyond its limits, but you understand that you have a possibility of being up there with the greats that, we have a lot of examples of in Australia. So it's all of that combined together, I think. That whole character building, as you say, Dan, the biopsychosocial nature of sport, you know, all of those things working together is what it's all about for me.
Do you think there's more pressure? I mean, you're not coaching right now, but you're coaching coaches. So you're in amongst coaches, and you've got this wealth of experience as a coach, as a teacher. Do you think there's greater pressure on coaches now? With respect to, if you reflect back on your own playing days, there perhaps wasn't the narrative around things like, player well-being and mental health, and these days there is, and I would always say great and for the
Mhm.
better, and I think that that's really important. Yet at the same
Yeah.
time, I can understand and appreciate that for coaches, that the delivery of that message means there's a pressure on them, in terms of their messaging and their activities and their sessions, to be able to stretch. We talk so much about supporting players, but we also need to. Everything that you're saying is we need to be able to stretch players as well.
Mm,
That means that there's greater complexity for you as a coach and greater pressure on you to be able to
mm.
accommodate those things.
Well, that's right. That's why I was using that example of the player that I
Mm.
failed to get, to stretch more. And it's a great word because I think we've got those capabilities, and it's us figuring out the best messaging to do that. Part of it is spending more time with those athletes. And luckily, I had successes too with tough athletes where one of them I know, we nearly lost through an eating disorder, but we managed to get her back on board through a very tough approach. It was a tough approach. It was a tough love approach, actually, tough love. I called it, she had some expectations, but she was also told how much she was loved and how much we wanted her to be part of what we were trying to create. And at the end of the day, that was enough for her to change. And it only had to be a small change, it wasn't a huge change. And she did that, and we got the success that she deserved and she was a part of. Um, but she's always one where her, mental health will always be at question. There's no doubt about that. I cannot, as a coach, do anything about things that have happened in the past, traumatic experiences that we've all had in childhood. All I can do is say to myself, do no harm now. Seriously, do no harm. I tell my coaches not to do harm, and I mean it physically and mentally and spiritually. That's our job. Our job is not to do that. It's our job is to show the light and show the way forward and show the possibilities there. That's what I find most invigorating and exciting about coaching is that we figure out the problems and we're problem solvers together with the athlete and the support staff around us, and we show the ways we can be better, improve, and why. Because the players of today want to know why. That's the big difference. Whereas in our day, we just did what we were told. We didn't ask why. In fact, if we had have asked why, oh, we're a troublemaker, we're out of the team. So today, part of my approach to the diamonds, and I can still remember this when I first went in there, was to show the vision of what I wanted to create together with the group. And that was what was the positive light all along. And if you went away from it at all, that's when you got into trouble. You had to come back to that key purpose and vision for the whole program because that helped your decisions as a coach. I'm not saying whether it was harder nowadays or easier back in the day. Many coaches say to me it was easier in the old days because they could rule the roost. They could be autocratic. These days, you have to be far more nuanced, and that's why I say to coaches, it'd be great if you do a teaching degree, learn how to create a pedagogy of learning and how you create learning environments for your athletes and also for your support staff. See, in the old days, you didn't have support staff. Seriously, I was it. It was me and my manager that looked after our state team. And I usually had a older, more mature team manager who was very wise to keep me calm. But, the two of us would work well together. When you're thrust into now a head coaching role, you've got a staff, and it doesn't matter if they're part-time. You've still like with the Diamonds, I had 8 part-time staff, but they all have to be managed. They've got egos, they've got wants and needs and desires, and that's part of your job. That's why it's so exciting, Dan.
Let's dig into that a little bit because something that I've noticed over the years in my consultancy work is that, and I would almost say this is almost one of the most important parts of the role as a head coach is to have the best possible staff. So I'd be
Mm.
interested to hear from you. What are the key elements of managing your fellow coaches? What are you looking for in assistant coaches? What's important to Lisa Alexander when one reflects on assistant coaches?
Well, I definitely can think back to my assistant coaches I had for Melbourne Phoenix, which was I think it was the early 2000s where we won back-to-back premierships. And I had Simone McGuinness, who's now still coaching the Melbourne Vixens here in Australia. I think it's her 13th season. Um, and I had Gillian Lee as the assistant coach for the other. They were both defenders. So the requirement for me is that they do cover an area of the court that it's not my first natural area of the court. I'm naturally an attacking coach, although I've coached the defence end. And I tell a lot of the coaches to make sure you coach in the area that you are not as comfortable with. So you get the skills required in all the areas to be a head coach. So I usually pick someone like that. Also, that they understand my psychology and what I'm trying to achieve. So having Gillian was fantastic because we'd worked together as co-coaches with lots of camps, and we understood each other's philosophy. She was also a teacher, so that worked very well from that point of view. We really worked together in that space of creating a learning environment. And, Simone was also the same. She did a psychology degree. She was obviously a fantastic diamond herself, player. So she brought that understanding from a playing point of view that I needed at the time as well with those players. So it's really complementing my skill set with what the team needs as well, I think are the two most important parts. And then, of course, the character, the attitude, what the person values, what their mission is, what their purpose is for coaching is very important for me. Character is essential in terms of the decision I would make about the people that come in to work in such a high pressured situation.
It's really interesting. There's four things I wrote down there. To speak to what you said at the end there, character, um, then assistant coaches with complementary skills to you. So they might not have exactly the same skills as you, but they're covering gaps. Then the next thing is alignment. There's an alignment of philosophy. Obviously, you're having a lot of conversations with them in order to align with them, or for them to align with you, I should say. And then, interestingly, going back to what you said at the beginning of that narrative, is you're looking for assistant coaches who are going to broaden their skills, and you want to help them broaden their skills. So they might have an expertise in one area, but you want them to broaden their skills. So four things you're kind of looking for and looking to develop within them.
Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? And then I just thought of the other one, which is just plain loyalty.
Okay.
Um, when the times are tough, you can rely on that person to have your back. Because there's lots of distractions, there's lots of egos, and so it'd be nice to know that your assistant coach is actually being loyal to you and not going behind your back.
That's got to be quite a big one in terms of reducing your sense of anxiety and uncertainty in what is quite an anxiety inducing and uncertain environment.
Yeah, it is, and I remember Simone and I in 2002 used to laugh together a lot on the bench. That was part of the way we dealt with the anxiety of what we were watching. Is we would have a joke and a laugh that broke the air, and we'd see something amusing the players had done that no one else would know, but we would know, and that was our own little private sort of space together and helped us connect. Um, and, humor is just so important. I think that's another key element of everything I've done in coaching is there's always going to be laughter, whether it's me cracking the joke or me being silly and vulnerable at different times just to break the mood of the group. I will do that, to make sure that everyone's lightens the load on themselves and doesn't take it too seriously.
I was going to ask you, there's so much conversation now, certainly in my world, around coach well-being and mental health. It's such a demanding role. You've spoken a little bit to it there already, but what are the kind of things that you consider doing or embodying or engaging with to manage your well-being in such a demanding role and industry?
Oh, well, I'll give you an example of what I did when my mother passed away in 2016. Thanks to Mum, she did it in a convenient fashion. She managed to do it not during a test series, but I had a test series coming up, not like Tracy Neville's father, who passed away unfortunately on the plane going over to World Cup. Um, but What I did was I took my own medicine. I would say to the players, if anything like that happened, they had to go and see the psychologist and our wellbeing person and work through a process of how they were going to work through their grief and also keep up their training, or if they needed to have time off. So I certainly took my own medicine and took myself off to our sports medicine doctor, and she spoke to me, and she felt that I didn't need to see a psychiatrist at the time. And so I spent some time with our wellbeing manager at the time and went through basically a grieving process of what I'd feel, what I'd be like, and then how I was going to approach the next test series in the best shape possible, considering what I'd just been through, which was it was traumatic losing mum. Um, well, for me, it was early. I mean, she's 77. I know she's had a good life, but at the end of the day, it was a bit of a shock. And so dealing with all of that, plus all the family complexities, you have to do what you want your athletes to do. That's always been my motto, is that you must model. If you say to the players you want them recovering mentally and physically, you need to do it as well. That's why you can't be workaholics, because someone's going to burn out sometime. Yes, you can work hard, but I believe you can still have 8 hours sleep a night. Um, so they're the sorts of things that I work on. And I also made it clear in one of my, I think I addressed the Cricket Australia people back in 2013 or 12 about the need for well-being in high performance, that I didn't see it was a soft option. I thought it was an essential part of any high performance program, that if you don't show care for all your athletes and your staff in terms of their families, family comes first, etc., something is going to break. And it always does. And I think people kind of enjoyed it back in the day, which is really hard, but there were some interesting characters that thought it was part of, selection process. I never thought that. And then I spoke to AFL coaches here in Australia about their own well-being. Were they looking after it enough? Because we had some incidents where the children of coaches were, having mental problems or drug issues or whatever, and it was because, dad wasn't spending enough time at home. And that really hit some of our coaches really hard between the eyes. And I just said to them at the time, family must come first. You can't operate as a high level, high performance coach if your support system is not fully engaged and behind you, and you need to spend time on that. So you do have to put that in your schedule or whatever. And Eddie spoke about it with me the other week with his wife. He has to, when he comes home, he plays with the dog and he puts the phone away so he can, interact with his wife. So those elements, even though we shouldn't have to talk about it, that's what I decided at that time to lead with and talk about. I got a little bit of criticism here and there, but mostly people said, thank goodness someone's talking about it.
Lisa, is this a wrestle for coaches? Was this a wrestle, an internal, a mental wrestle for yourself? You know that well-being is so important. You've got to keep your sense of well-being in order to perform, yet at the same time, I write every day about thoughts as human beings. Yes, we can generate thoughts, but thoughts, emotions, feelings happen to us. And when we start off in coaching and throughout our coaching career, especially if you're coaching at the elite adult level, the professional level, your a constant thought is that the opposition are doing more things than you or better things than you, and you want to beat them or you want to keep up with them. Is it that constant wrestle to be able to put the phone away, to be able to put the video analysis away and go back to your family? Is it a wrestle?
Totally a wrestle. And even tomorrow I'm going and doing a spa day with my daughter. She's invited me for a spa day, and I just said to my husband, I haven't done this with Carly. I need to do this. And it's a sacrifice because it means I have to go to Melbourne and do the travel stuff and everything, but at the end of the day, it's really important to prioritize it. Even just time spent together is gold. Holidays, um, and going away, and not having, my husband just said even this last trip we did to India, it's just amazing the difference in myself personally, not having a coaching job, you know, on my back burdening me while I'm on holiday, because he used to see that all the time. I would still work on holidays. I mean, I'd sneak off and do it sometimes, but because as you know, and talking about it with Eddie in this recent interview I did, we become obsessive. And it's part of our strength. I know that psychologically it was a part of my elite coaching strength, but it does have its costs for you personally, because you don't realize it personally until you have a fall or you have a shock, and all of a sudden your family's not there, or they're not as supportive as you thought they were going to be, because they're just sick of you being so self-indulgent at times that coaches have to be.
Shifting topics, you for the last few years have been coaching coaches. You've been going to environments and observing
Yeah.
coaches. And tell me a little bit about that. We've been talking quite a bit recently on Sports Social Show about coach development and coaching coaches. So, what do you personally do when you're coaching coaches? What do you look for?
Well, first of all, I kind of, I suppose I try and treat them like the players that I used to coach anyway, because I'm actually coaching them as people. So I get to know them as people first. You know, I'm doing this new approach with NetFit over here about coaching packages, and I said to them, okay, well, I'll do an hour Zoom, and then we'll do this. And when you're talking about those Zoom, discussions you have prior to coming and taking a training session, that's where a lot of the gold happens, is those discussions that you have with the coaches. So I've actually said we need to increase that, because I need like an hour with them talking about their, wishes and their desires of why they're coaching, their philosophy, and, checking in with them. What do they do for their profession? How that all works together. And then on the other side, I need to also talk about the technical realities of the training session. So there's so many different elements to it. I don't see it a lot different really to coaching a team and players. I see it as an extension of that. And actually, in many respects, I feel like I'm getting messages across to people who are really hungry for knowledge, and in many respects are much more open sometimes than players are when you're engaging with them. So I find it enormously enjoyable to do and inspiring at times. So it really works with my purpose of making a difference.
How does stepping into different sports meet your eye, and how do you feel about it? Going to AFL, going to rugby league. I mean, that must be. Do you find that challenging, or do you actually find it easier because you're not there to have an expertise on the sport, but just to observe coaching?
Yeah, definitely it is. I find it, you can compartmentalize things a lot more when you're going to a different sport. You just look at things so much more like the eagle assessing the prey. I'm thinking from the air. I'm thinking of the wedge-tailed eagle looking down, and you don't have to worry about all the politics of the sport or your history with the sport. You can just talk about coaching in general, and I find that really refreshing. And I believe it's very helpful. I did a review for the Melbourne Boomers, who are unfortunately not an entity anymore in the WNBL, which is basketball. And we did a high performance review with them, and it was terrific. I really enjoyed it. Three of the players that were the leaders, they're all now in the Australian Opals team. And the coach got his premiership the following year. So we must have done something right, Dan, in that high performance review, which was not to change the coach. It was actually to tell the board what the coach needed to get the premiership. And that was a very different purpose to a lot of reviews that, like I won't do reviews when it's clear the agenda is to get rid of the coach. I'm just not interested.
So, in your, I suppose it's an opinion, but when you look at the wide world of sports, and I think we're quite guilty of this in football, soccer, especially in Europe, do you think that sporting organisations can tend to be too trigger happy when it comes to coaches, and actually there are endless possibilities to do these kind of high performance reviews and actually say, hey, look, if we put the right support staff around this coach and actually we give the coach the opportunity, as long as they take it, the opportunity to upskill themselves, to have an effective reflective process in place, actually in the end you can save these organizations quite a bit of money. you know
Well, I can't believe that business people get into a sporting board and then act so emotionally about sport when they've got this great business sense. And what do they do in their business? They, of course, they're not going to throw a CEO out after 1 year unless they've made the mistake in the first place of putting the wrong person there. So, if they've done the work to get the right person into a position, certainly having a review and looking at the whole program and what they can do and what they can add to that program is the most important thing. Followed by, of course, as you said before, the coach themselves wanting to improve. That's one of the other big blockers. I can tell you, most coaches don't want to open that door. It's a tough door for them to open when it gets thrust upon them. When they seek it, and they're part of that conversation of let's get better, then you can start cooking with gas. Well, maybe electricity in Australia, but they're the sorts of things that you've got to have in place. Yes, I often marvel at the boards, the sporting boards, and they've got all these great business people, and then they get on and chuck a coach out. It's unbelievable, and it's such a waste of money. That's the other thing. Like Dan McKellar, he's had 1 year at Leicester Tigers. I mean, I don't know what he's done wrong, but, clearly something has happened to chuck him out after 1 year.
do you think sometimes, I mean, I can't speak to that at all, but I perhaps know I've been embedded in organizations where things have changed, the head coach or the manager, term we might use over here in football soccer, where there's been a change of personnel, and you can kind of understand it from the inside. Do you think that head coaches need to be better at providing that comprehensive, um, tactical, technical, psychosocial plans so that they become better at communicating upwards, so that at boardroom level the board understand what that person is trying to do, and so subsequently they're not as uh, as willing to part ways so quickly when results aren't quite there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely as a national coach of a country, you definitely have to have those skills and be able to speak to the board exactly about all the areas that you need to improve and have regular conversations with them. But I'd be all, and I will, and I talk about this with some of the coaches that are coaching in the domestic leagues now, is that they do need to communicate up. How they do that is very different according to the organisation. I find in England it tends to be much more about, there is definitely a pecking order, much more. In Australia, it's a bit flatter, a flatter structure. Um, and so there will be someone that then goes to speak to the board. And if that someone and you as a head coach are not on the same page, that's when you have a real issue and disconnect. So it's a very interesting thing. I came on board as the Australian Diamonds coach without a high performance manager, and then I got one. because I said to the CEO, I have to have somebody who's going to do that administration work. I can't spend my time on emails. I have to be coaching. But the cost of that is that you do lose a bit of your power. That means in terms of your voice being directly to the board. Sometimes it then goes through another person. And that's when your alignment issues or, those things I spoke about before, like loyalty and who's trying to, be a door runner, so to speak, in an organization that can be your undoing as a head coach. So you've still got to be aware of it and you have to have somebody who you can really rely on to do that.
Fantastic. What is next for Lisa Alexander?
Well, there's lots of things going on at the moment. I'm really enjoying a lot of corporate work as well, in leadership in business, especially because of obviously so much crossover between what people are doing in their business lives, which I find fascinating. I've always read about it and enjoyed it, and the the lessons that I've learnt as a high performance coach are so apt. So I do a lot of work with that, especially women leaders, because I'm really trying to support more women to put themselves up for leadership positions, especially in coaching in Australia. We've only got 15% of our coaches are high performance women and the high performance level, and most of those are netball coaches. So why was it that we could get netball coaches up there? Dan. Any case, that's another matter in my own country. But I noted that your athletics team, I think the Great Britain one for Paris, has really got it almost 50-50 split, which in their athletic coaches, which is amazing. And I think just, the guys in high performance actually really it's a great mix when we've got more women there as well, because I think
Mhm.
it's just it reflects what society is, and I think it really helps both men's programs and women's programs to have a nice balance of um, men and women in those positions of authority as coaches, etc. So yeah, I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to maybe have a look at a couple of coaching roles. We'll see. We'll see what my husband's got in mind. He might prefer me to go out and get the firewood for our fire.
Well, whichever direction you choose, I'm really looking forward to following it and continuing to learn from you and your journey. And I know everybody listening in would like to do the same. So, Lisa, how can people find you, follow you, and potentially get in touch?
Well, I always tell them I'm following you, Dan, of course. That's part of what I do, particularly in that biopsychosocial space. And I love, really handy hints you put out there on Twitter. I mean, I'm just an avid follower, but I'm also on Twitter and I occasionally put some intelligent things out there for coaches.
Always intelligent. I follow you as well, so always intelligent.
So my Twitter handle, I sometimes put things on Instagram, but really Twitter's my space for talking to the people that I like to talk to in the high performance space. And they can also find me on LinkedIn, of course. You will see Lisa Alexander AM, and it's me, and I'm a high performance. I haven't called myself the coach whisperer just yet, but I'm a high performance coach consultant.
Lisa, many congrats for all of your wonderful work and for the Australian medal as well. That's absolutely amazing and thoroughly deserved. So, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast episode and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So, please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.